They say every crown glitters. But inside the halls where history breathes and tradition rules like a silent monarch of its own, even jewels feel heavy. There are names history remembers with reverence and others it remembers with sympathy. And then there are those who lived not to rule a nation, but to fight a war inside their own heart. A war between duty and desire, fate and freedom, birthright and the fragile ache of loving someone you were never meant to love. Princess Margaret Rose, younger sister to a queen, daughter of a king, child of a monarchy built on centuries of promise and burden. Born into privilege, yes, but also into expectations so tight they could suffocate. The world saw diamonds and palaces and silk gowns. But what they did not see, what they could not see, was the girl behind the gold, the young woman behind the Windsor perfection who wanted something simple, something fragile, something human. She did not want a crown. She did not want power. She did not crave obedience or nations bowing at her existence. She wanted a heart, one man, one life that felt like hers and not one designed for her long before she arrived in the world. Love came not in fireworks or fairy tale proclamations fit for a royal announcement. It came quietly, soft, the way a candle glows in the corner of a dim room. It came in stolen glances and careful steps, in evenings where the palace walls felt less like a fortress and more like a cage dressed in velvet. It came not as destiny, but as escape. Peter Townsend, not a king, not a prince, not a man born into pomp and protocol, but a war hero with eyes that had seen the world not in gold and ceremony, but in fire and loss. A man who earned his honor not through birthright, but through battlefields where courage was tested by death itself. He came into Margaret's life not as a courtly fantasy, but as a man who knew grief, who understood restraint, who carried dignity not sewn into a coronation robe, but carved into the quiet places of his soul. He looked at her, not as a symbol, not as a royal jewel, but as a woman. And for Margaret, that was a kind of salvation she did not expect, but could not live without. They met in hallways polished by centuries of footsteps, under chandeliers older than dynasties across oceans. Their love grew not in rebellion, but in secrecy, because in their world, wanting someone was itself an act of resistance. He was appointed to her father's household. He served the king with loyalty, and as she grew, Margaret saw in him not the trappings of title, but the softness of refuge. A brilliant, dangerous softness. She was 17 when the world first truly felt like hers. London rebuilding, the monarchy shining once more after the shadows of war. New beginnings painted across old stone. And yet, for Margaret, the beginning was not the nation's revival. It was the quiet curve of his smile, the way he carried himself with humility, grace, a steadiness she had never known in the whirl of royal duty. He made her laugh, he made her think. He made her feel like the crown was merely a thing upon her head, not the sum of her being. But the world, especially one built on monarchy, does not bend for love. It demands sacrifice. And in those gilded corridors, sacrifice was expected like breath. He was older. He was divorced, a stain in that era's eyes. A man who had lived, who had made choices, who had been scarred by life and love already. But Margaret was young enough to believe that love could outrun rules. And maybe, just maybe, she was right. In another world. Not in this one. The courtiers saw. The walls saw. And walls in palaces carry whispers like wind carries dust. What begins as a rumor becomes a fear. And what becomes fear becomes control. Her father died. Grief became crown. The world tilted. Elizabeth became queen, and with a single shift of destiny, Margaret's life, once simply shadow, became spectacle. Every move watched, every choice weighed, every whisper judged. And in her grief, his presence grew not smaller but larger. Peter Townsend was the one constant in a life changing faster than storms break over English seas. They found comfort in each other. They found truth in each other. They found love, not in fairy tale triumph, but in stolen humanity. But a princess belonging to a kingdom is not a woman belonging to herself. And where hearts dare, monarchy demands permission. She knew the cost. The church would not approve. Parliament would not approve. Tradition, that ancient, cold monarch that ruled even queens, would not approve. If she chose him, she would lose income, home, title, place in succession. Stripped not of dignity, but of identity constructed since birth. She could choose freedom, but the price was everything the world insisted she must be. She was told to wait, to think, to be patient as though love could be rationed like wartime sugar. They sent him away, posted abroad, disguised as necessity. But absence does not break love. It burns it brighter. Letters carried longing. Newspaper speculation carried cruelty. The palace carried silence, its favorite weapon. For 2 years she held on to hope. Hope that crowns had limits. Hope that being royal still meant being human. Hope that the world would allow what her heart had already chosen. But power does not soften. It preserves itself first. And so the announcement came, drafted in perfect royal tone, polished like marble and twice as cold. She read the words to the world, but she did not write them in her soul. I have decided. But she had not decided. Decision had been made for her by a system older than her dreams and heavier than her breath. And in that moment, history recorded a princess's choice. But history never truly saw the woman who shattered quietly inside that choice. She stood there, poised for cameras, wrapped in silk and expectation, a royal figure molded by centuries of precedent. But inside, she was simply Margaret, a woman who had loved and lost not by fate's cruelty, but by the deliberate hand of duty. Crowns break hearts quietly. They do it in polished rooms with gentle voices, signatures, and tradition. There was no thunder, no scandalous eruption, no dramatic confrontation, just a stillness, a quiet settling of sorrow like dust on velvet. After the announcement, the world did what it always does. It clapped for her dignity. It praised her sacrifice. It called her loyal, noble, dutiful. They admired her restraint as though restraint were not a cage for the soul. They celebrated her choice as though she had been given one. People always like the princess who obeys more than the woman who feels. In the interviews and polite receptions that followed, Margaret smiled. She lifted her chin the way royals are taught, soft poise, unbroken composure, but eyes betray where voices cannot. And in hers, every so often, flickered a storm, the kind you only see in someone who did not lose a love, but was denied one. There are heartbreaks that heal because time softens the edge. And there are heartbreaks that linger because they represent the life you never got to choose. Margaret's heartbreak was the second kind. Grief for a future stolen is heavier than grief for a past lost. As years passed, she wore glamour like armor. She became the brilliant, rebellious, intoxicating sister, the one who smoked long cigarettes and laughed too loudly, who danced at midnight and dared to be seen, the one who lived vividly in moments, as though trying to drown out the echo of one decision she never fully escaped. London adored her glamour, envied it even. But glamour is often the most beautiful disguise for sorrow. Behind the glitter of tiaras and the crackle of flashbulbs, she was a woman suspended between two worlds, the girl who once dreamed freely and the royal who never could again. She tried to move on. People always suggest that, don't they? Move on. As though hearts are suitcases to be packed and reopened elsewhere. She met suitors, smiled politely, entertained possibilities the way royalty entertains diplomacy, carefully, strategically, without giving too much away. But every man who came after was compared to a man she could never have. And love measured against impossibility rarely survives. Then came Anthony Armstrong Jones, charismatic, modern, an artist, not a statesman. A man who lived with a camera in hand and saw the world through frames, not rules. He didn't worship her title. He wanted her image, her beauty, her rebellion. And for a moment, Margaret mistook being seen for being understood. There is a difference. Their romance was electric, unpredictable, glamorous, reckless. It felt like escape. He offered what tradition never had, unpredictability. And sometimes when love has been denied, chaos feels like freedom. They married in splendor broadcast across televisions, the first royal wedding ever filmed for millions. The world cheered the spectacle, thrilled by the pageantry, unaware that sometimes fairy tales are performed for others, not lived by those who wear the crowns. But marriage built on escape is a fragile foundation. Two storms do not make calm seas. Their life together was brilliant in flashes and bruising in shadows. Affairs whispered in corridors. Jealousies fed like quiet poison. Affection turned to competition. Margaret had found a man who loved adventure, not stability. She, in turn, loved fiercely but also destructively, the way hearts do when they have been denied too long. The marriage frayed like silk caught on thorns. Slowly at first, then loudly. The press fed on their arguments, the public whispered their scandals, and the palace endured it in silence, because royalty does not do collapse publicly, only privately. Margaret found herself again trapped in the image of a life she did not choose. Not as a princess this time, but as a wife, expected to endure dignified suffering. And when Antony no longer needed her shine to illuminate his own, when the thrill dimmed and the reality set in, Margaret was left not with partnership, but with emptiness dressed in jewels. She sought comfort in the way hearts do when weary, in little rebellions, fleeting affections, quiet escapes to islands where palm trees cared nothing for crowns or cameras. On Mystique, she found temporary stillness, rum and laughter, sunlight warm enough to numb the ache. Love that was not forbidden, yet still not enough to save her from what lived inside her memory. Some say she was reckless, some say she was spoiled. But perhaps she was simply tired of being a symbol, a duty, a headline, a cautionary tale. The truth is far simpler. She was tired of not choosing her own life. Peter Townsend married someone else, not out of betrayal, but necessity. Lives cannot remain suspended forever. Even love that never dies must sometimes be carried, not lived. When they met again decades later, they did not weep or regret aloud. They greeted each other as those who once dreamed together and now walked separately. Life had not been cruel, but it had not been kind either. She once asked him if he had been happy. He said yes, in parts. Happiness for him had come like sunlight between passing clouds. She nodded. She understood. Happiness had visited her the same way. Brief, bright, borrowed. And in a way, they both knew the truth. They might have been happy always, had the world allowed it. But the world chose for them. Margaret's later years were quiet, punctuated by illness and the slowing of a woman who had once burned brighter than anyone in the room. Her body faltered. Her spirit, once fire, became embers. But even in her final days, she carried dignity, wit, and that unmistakable spark, a reminder that she had lived, not just existed. She left this world not as a queen, not as a monarch, not as a triumphant icon of tradition, but as a woman who loved deeply and paid the price for being born under a crown that valued obedience over heart. History remembers Elizabeth for duty, for strength, for reign. It remembers Diana for compassion, for tragedy, for light. And it remembers Margaret for rebellion, for romance, for heartbreak. But perhaps we should remember her for something simpler, for being a woman who dared to love in a world that punished her for it. She never ruled a nation, but she ruled her own emotions with courage, even when they broke her. She never wore the crown, but she wore the weight of it in every choice she was never allowed to make. And somewhere in the quiet corners of Buckingham Palace, there may still linger the faint echo of a girl laughing with a man she could not keep. A girl who believed, if only for a moment, that love could rewrite destiny. In another life, she might have chosen him freely. In another story, she would have become not the royal tragedy, but the royal triumph. In another world, she would have kept her crown and her heart. But in this world, she was Princess Margaret, and love, pure, honest, unadorned, was the one thing even royalty could not grant her. She would have given up the crown, but the crown was not willing to give up her, and that perhaps is the most human truth ever lived inside a palace. She learned, slowly and painfully, that the world is kinder to queens than to sisters. Queens are allowed to be symbols. Sisters are expected to be stories, preferably glamorous, occasionally tragic, always watched. Margaret played her part because she had no script to choose, only scenes written long before her birth. But inside her, the quiet truth persisted. She had once stood at the edge of everything she ever wanted, hand stretched toward a man the world did not approve of, and she had been forced to pull it back. And so, she built a life out of fragments, glittering fragments, funny fragments, rebellious fragments, each one a spark from the life she almost lived. Some nights in London, at smoky soirees where jazz curled through the air and the carpet was soft beneath her heels, she would tilt her head back and laugh the way only someone who has loved deeply can laugh. That laugh was her act of defiance, her way of saying, I am still here, I am still mine, even if I am not allowed to be fully so. But society is always hungry for the good story, and a princess who once almost gave up the crown for love makes for delicious mythology. Reporters waited for her slip. Critics waited for her misstep. Admirers waited for her next dazzling entrance. And Margaret, ever the performer, gave all of them what they sought, but never what they deserved. Because no matter how much they speculated, no newspaper headline could print the true weight of living half a life. With Antony, life had been ablaze, wild, intoxicating, unstable. Their wedding was a masterpiece of television and monarchy, history watching as a new kind of royal union unfolded, modern, glamorous, dramatic. But white dresses do not bless certainty. And when Margaret stepped into marriage, she did not step into sanctuary. She stepped into a theater where the final act had already been written. Their marriage wasn't a quiet unraveling. It was a spectacular one. There were nights where they loved each other with desperate intensity, convinced that if they held each other tightly enough, they could drown out the ghosts of the lives they did not live. And there were nights where rooms felt colder than winter in Balmoral, nights where silence thickened until one of them left to breathe. Infidelity came not like a shock, but like an inevitability. Two hearts burdened by expectation, clinging to passion as a substitute for peace. Margaret turned to companionship in the arms of men who could not hold her heart, but tried to hold her loneliness. Antony found solace in spaces where cameras didn't exist, in faces unburdened by royal weight. And through it all, the palace walls watched in dignified agony, the way only ancient institutions can watch, silently, without interference, as people break slowly under the weight of roles they never asked for. When their divorce came, it was not scandal in the explosive sense. It was more tragic than that. A quiet resignation, a second heartbreak, another chapter in which the world expected grace while she endured loss. Margaret stood by the gates of duty once more, stripped not of titles now, but of illusions. Yet she did not disappear. Margaret never disappeared. Instead, she sought escape in sun-drenched islands where protocol dissolved into sand. Mystique. Not a court, not a throne, but a refuge. There she smoked cigarettes under palm trees, laughed with friends who cared nothing for hierarchy, and danced barefoot at twilight with men who saw her as a woman before they saw her as a princess. Some called her decadent, others called her scandalous. But in truth, she was simply breathing. In those moments on Mustique, rum glass sweating in her hand, waves whispering secrets against the shore, she seemed almost free. Free from the press, free from duty, free from the crushing expectations that followed her from palace to palace. Yet even paradise carries echoes. Even in the sunlight, the shadows followed. For a broken heart is not healed by warmth alone, only eased. Margaret lived loudly because she had been denied so much in silence. She sought passion not because she was reckless, but because she had lost the one love worth sacrificing everything for and was left with a life she never truly chose. She was not spoiled, she was starved. Starved of agency, starved of choice, starved of the simple privilege to follow her heart as any ordinary woman might. The world misread her rebellion as vanity. But the truth was softer, sadder. She was trying to reclaim pieces of herself that duty had claimed first. Her later years grew heavier. Cigarettes, stress, heartbreak, and a life lived intensely took their toll. Her health faltered. Illness arrived like quiet thieves in the night. A stroke, then another. Pain traced the edges of her days. She walked slower, spoke softer, laughed less often. The fire dimmed, not extinguished, but weathered. Yet even then, in the gentle dusk of her life, there was dignity. She never begged the world to understand her, never asked for pity. She bore her wounds as she bore her jewels, with grace, even when it hurt. Some nights, she would speak of music she loved, memories she held, moments where she felt truly seen. There was nostalgia, not bitterness. There was sorrow, not spite. Because Margaret knew that her life had been complicated, flawed, luminous, tragic. It had been hers, to whatever degree the world had allowed. And still, somewhere deep inside her, the echo of a young girl once laughing in palace corridors lingered. The girl who believed love could change the world before she learned the world would not change for love. When she died, the world mourned not a sovereign, but a soul. A woman who had lived in the shadow of crowns and yet cast her own light, rebellious, glamorous, imperfect, unforgettable. They placed her near her father, near the memories of a simpler time. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere beyond the veil,